A close friend breaks your trust, not dramatically, not maliciously, just enough to hurt. What would you do? Do you confront them, forgive them, or step back quietly? Now, a different scene. A civil servant in a flood hit district faces a choice. Relief material is available, but procurement procedures will take time. Lives may be lost if she waits. Rules may be broken if she doesn't. What's the right thing to do? Most of us jump straight to an answer from instinct, from emotion, from experience. But philosophers don't do that. They pause and ask three different questions. What does this dilemma mean? What principles should guide me? What should I do here and now? These questions are not the same. They belong to three dimensions of ethics: meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. If we don't understand the difference, our moral decisions feel confusing, inconsistent, and conflicted. In this episode, we'll explore these three dimensions and return to both dilemmas with a clearer way to think, judge, and decide. When we talk about ethics in everyday life, we usually ask a single question: is this right or wrong? But in philosophy, ethics is not organized around one question. It's organized around three distinct kinds of inquiry, each doing a different kind of work. Confusing these questions is one of the main reasons ethical reasoning feels unclear and inconsistent. At the most basic level, ethics asks, what do moral words like right, wrong, duty, or justice actually mean? Are moral claims capable of being true or false? Are they objective or depend on culture and emotion? This level of inquiry is called meta-ethics. At the next level, ethics asks, which general principles should guide human conduct and why? Should we judge actions by their consequences, by duties and rights, or by character? This is the domain of normative ethics. At the final level, ethics asks, how should these principles be applied to concrete situations with real people, real constraints, and real consequences? This is a domain of applied ethics. These are not competing approaches. They are different dimensions of ethical inquiry, each addressing a distinct question. Now let's explore what meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics actually are, and why each of them matter for personal and professional decision making. Before we decide what is right, ethics asks us to pause and ask something more basic. What do we mean when we say something is right or wrong? This is a domain of meta-ethics. In academic philosophy, meta-ethics refers to the branch of ethics that examines the meaning, the status, and justification of moral claims. Meta-ethics does not tell us what to do. Instead, it asks what we are doing when we make moral judgments at all. When we say an action is unjust or wrong, are we stating a fact? Or are we expressing an emotion? Or are we reflecting a cultural norm? Or appealing to a shared moral standard? Philosophers ask, can moral claims be true or false? Are they objective or dependent on social context? Do they arise from reason, emotion, or some combination of both? These questions matter because moral disagreement is often conceptual, not merely practical. Two people may agree on all the facts of a situation and still disagree morally, because they mean different things by the words like fairness, harm, or duty. Now consider a personal situation. A close friend breaks your trust. You feel hurt, angry, disappointed. Meta-ethics asks, what does betrayal mean in this context? Is all harm moral harm? Is my response an emotional reaction or a moral judgment that can be justified? It encourages clarity before condemnation. The same kind of clarification is essential in professional public life also. Civil servants, doctors, teachers, and managers routinely invoke terms like public interest, equity, responsibility, and duty. But what do these words actually mean in a given context? When two officers disagree during disaster relief, one invoking procedural fairness, the other moral urgency, the disagreement is often not about facts, but how these moral concepts are being understood. Metaethics helps us slow down and examine those assumptions. It reminds us that ethical reasoning does not begin with answers, it begins with conceptual clarity. With that foundation in place, we can now move to the next question. Ethics asks, what principles should guide our actions and why? Now, this takes us to normative ethics. Normative ethics is concerned with identifying and justifying the general standards by which actions are judged right or wrong. It does not focus on specific cases yet. Instead, it asks what ought to guide human conduct in general. Across ethical theory, three broad approaches have shaped the discussion on normative ethics. The first focuses on consequences. According to consequentialist thinking, an action is right if it produces good outcomes such as well-being, welfare, or the reduction of harm. Moral reasoning here is forward-looking and outcome-oriented. The second approach focuses on duties and rights. From this perspective, some actions are morally required or forbidden, regardless of their consequences. Honesty, fairness, respect for persons, and fidelity to rules function as moral constraints, not variables to be traded off for better results. The third approach focuses on character. Virtue ethics asks not only what we should do, but what kind of person we should be. It emphasizes qualities such as integrity, courage, compassion, and practical wisdom, and understands moral action as an expression of good character. These approaches do not simply offer different answers, they represent different ways of reasoning morally, each drawing attention to distinct aspects of ethical life. Now consider a personal situation. A family member wrongs you. Should you confront them? A duty-based approach emphasizes honesty and self-respect. A consequentialist approach weighs the likely impact on relationships and future behavior. A virtue-based approach asks what a fair and compassionate person would do. Now consider a professional or public service context. During disaster relief, an official must decide whether to strictly follow procedure or act immediately to save lives. Consequential reasoning prioritizes speed and outcome. Duty-based reasoning stresses legality and accountability. Virtue ethics highlights prudence, courage, and moral responsibility under pressure. Normative ethics helps us to see why ethical disagreement persists and why moral reasoning is rarely about applying single rule in isolation. Normative ethics gives a structured lens for judgment before we confront the complexity of real-world situations. But principles alone are not enough. Ethics must still answer a final question. Given the situation, these constraints and these people, what should be done now? This is where applied ethics begins. Applied ethics refers to the use of moral principles to analyze and resolve specific real-world moral problems, whether in personal relationships or in professional and public life. Importantly, applied ethics is not mechanical, it does not provide formulas. Applied ethics requires judgment, sensitivity to context, and an awareness of practical constraints and consequences. At this stage, ethical reasoning is no longer abstract. It becomes practical, interpretive, and responsibility-driven. Applied ethics asks, how do we balance competing values? Which principles matter most here? What risks are acceptable? And what responsibilities follow from this decision? Consider a personal situation. You discover that a close friend has made a serious mistake, one that could harm others. Honesty matters, so does the obligation to avoid unnecessary harm. So does the value of long-term trust. Applied ethics does not tell you which value to pick. It requires to weigh these considerations, interpret them in the context, and decide what responsibility demands in the situation. Now consider professional and public life. In governance, medicine, business, or technology, decisions are often made under pressure with incomplete information and irreversible consequences. A public official may have to choose between transparency and confidentiality. A doctor may have to balance truth telling with compassion. A manager may face conflict between loyalty and fairness. In such cases, ethical judgment is not about applying a single principle. It's about integrating principles responsibly and being able to justify that integration. This is why applied ethics emphasizes context, proportionality, accountability, and reasoned justification. Ethics at this stage becomes less about certainty, more about responsible decision making under real conditions. With this final dimension in place, now we are ready to return to the dilemmas we began with and see how these three dimensions work together in practice. First, the personal case. A close friend breaks your trust. Metaethics asks us to begin by clarifying concepts. What do we mean by trust or betrayal here? Is this moral violation or a personal disappointment? Are your reactions emotional or can they be morally justified? Only once the meaning is clear does normative ethics come into play. A duty-based approach highlights honesty and self-respect. A consequentialist approach considers the long-term impact on the relationship. A virtue ethics approach asks what a fair and compassionate person would do. Applied ethics then brings judgment into the real situation. What is the context of the relationship? Is this a pattern or a one-time failure? What response is proportionate, responsible, and constructive? The final decision whether to confront, forgive, or set boundaries or step back emerges not from instinct but from structured moral reasoning. Now consider the professional dilemma. A civil servant in a flood-hit district must decide whether to follow procedures strictly or to act immediately to deliver relief. Metaethics clarifies the moral language being used. What does public interest mean in an emergency? What does duty require when lives are at risk? Normative ethics then frames the moral tension. Consequential reasoning emphasizes saving lives without delay. Duty-based reasoning stresses legality and accountability. Virtue ethics highlights prudence, courage, and responsibility under pressure. Applied ethics brings all this together. It considers emergency provisions, proportionality, documentation, and the need to act decisively while remaining answerable. The ethical decision is not reckless rule breaking or rigid rule following, but a justified, transparent response to an exceptional situation. This is how ethical maturity is built, by moving carefully between clarity of concepts, strength of principles, and wisdom in action. And this is why ethics is not about having ready answers, but about knowing how to reason when the answers are not obvious. As we have seen, ethics is not simply about choosing between right and wrong. It is about understanding how we arrive at those choices. Metaethics helps us clarify what our moral claims mean. Normative ethics gives us principles to guide judgment. Applied ethics helps us act responsibly in real situations. When these dimensions are confused, ethical reasoning feels messy, emotional, or arbitrary. When they are understood, ethical decision making becomes clearer, more balanced, and more defensible. This matters in personal life when trust is broken, when relationships are strained, when choices are painful. It matters in professional life when decisions affect careers, institutions, and lives. And matters profoundly in public service where ethical judgment shapes trust, legitimacy, and governance. Ethical maturity does not come from memorizing rules or having ready-made answers. It comes from developing the ability to move between concepts, principles, and action with care, humility, and responsibility. Whether you're preparing for UPSC, studying philosophy, working in an organization, or simply trying to live thoughtfully, these three dimensions of ethics offer a way to think more clearly, judge more fairly, and act more wisely. That ultimately is what ethics is for. So long, happy learning.